Welcome back. Okay, let's dive in. Now, what I'm going to walk through here definitely isn't the only way to solve this particular exercise, but it will highlight a few of the different methods that are available to us within Alteryx Designer. I'm going to start by breaking this problem into two sections, since we really have two completely different types of data to work with here. Let's head to the preparation palette and drop in a record ID tool that will help us split this data out. After the record ID, we'll add a filter and simply split on whether the record ID is 1, and whether that will funnel the data in one of two different directions in the workflow, and we'll handle each in due course. Let's take the top route first, where we only have the first row of data. Before we tackle those fruits, let's remind ourselves that we do have a common delimiter in this row. It's the semicolon, and we can use text to columns in the Parse tool palette to break this row up into smaller parts. So let's drop a text to columns into the workflow, and we'll set the configuration as follows. We'll make sure that the raw data field is selected, and then we'll set the delimiter to be semicolon. We'll accept the default of splitting into 3 columns, and we can run the workflow through. You'll see that we now have 5 columns in our results set, and it's done a pretty good job of separating out the data, but we still have more work to do. Let's drop a select tool here, and we'll do some housekeeping. We can deselect the record ID and the raw field now. They won't be used downstream. But also we can rename raw 1 as fruit, raw 2 as number, and we can actually coerce or force this field to be an int 16 at this point. Finally, we'll rename raw 3 as date. Run the workflow and we can see those changes applied. Okay, next job. Let's tackle those pesky fruit. Drop another text to columns tool into the workflow, and we'll break this collection up by recognizing that the fruit are all delimited with a comma. So let's add that to the delimiters box. If we run this through, you can see that we now have fruit 1, 2 and 3 in our results set. However, they've brought some baggage with them in the form of extra symbols, meaning that we have a little more work to do. Now, the quickest way to clean these fields up is to head to the preparation palette and drop a data cleansing tool into the workflow. And the configuration here is super easy. Make sure that only the 3 fruit fields are selected, and simply add a check to the box for punctuation. This will remove any punctuation symbols just from these 3 fields. Run the workflow and we look like we're in good shape. Next step, let's head back to the Parse palette and drop a date time tool into the workflow. We're going to pick up that date string that has some double quotes wrapped around it and turn it into a real date field with the name date_dt. We can use a custom format down at the bottom of the list, and we'll say double quotes dd hyphen mon hyphen yyy, and then finish with double quotes, just like we see in the raw data. Run this through, and we should now have a proper Alteryx date formatted value in the results set. Final little step of housekeeping here, make sure we've reordered the columns so that we have fruit 1, then fruit 2, then fruit 3, then number, and finally date_dt. The date should be a date format, the number should be int 16, and everything else should be a v string at this point. And that's our first section complete. So let's now tackle the 2 rows that came out of the false side of our earlier filter tool. Once again, we've got a set of data that's been delimited, but this time by a comma. So we can drop in a text to columns tool, make sure that we're pointing to the raw field once again, and that our delimiter this time is a comma, and then simply run the workflow. And this will give us 3 new parsed columns to take forward. And what's interesting in the results here is that every nugget of data that we're looking to extract seems to be encased in a single set of quotes, and thinking like an Alteryx Pro, we can find a way to deal with all these data elements in one go. Head over to the Transform tool palette and drop in a Transpose tool, and we'll use this to flatten our data into a simple table. Make sure that record ID is selected as the key column and that only fields 1, 2 and 3 are picked as data columns. Run the workflow and you'll see the new structure is just to have our values unpivoted into a single column. So much easier to process in the same way. Okay, so our next job is to strip those quotes off either end of the strings in that value field. Lots of different ways to achieve this. We could use a formula tool and work with string expressions. We could use another text to columns tool and break this string down into parts. It would be tempting to say that we can use a data cleansing tool to remove punctuation like we did earlier, but I'm afraid that's a no-go in this case. Do you see those dates with hyphen separators? We don't want to lose those as part of the punctuation cleanse, so we'll have to find another route. If you've not seen it in action before, this is actually a great time to cover basic functionality in the regex tool, maybe as an alternative. This tool also lives in the parse tool palette, and we can drop it into the workflow right after the transpose. In terms of configuration, we set the output method to parse down at the bottom and then select the value field as our choice to parse up at the top. Without going deep into regular expressions, which we cover extensively in the advanced course bundle, I'll share some links in our resources, regex works by identifying patterns in the data that we code up using the regex syntax. In our case, we'll write an expression that starts with a single quote, then open brackets, dot, star, close the brackets, and add a second single quote. This is regex syntax that says, find me a single quote in our string, then grab everything from the text until you find a second single quote. Down at the bottom, rename the output column to be value2 and run the workflow through. So our value2 field is looking good. We just need to get the data back into its original format. So what's the opposite action to a transpose tool? It's the crosstab tool, also available in the transform tool palette. For our configuration here, we'll select record ID as the grouping field, name as the column header, and then value2 as the values field. And we can go ahead and choose concatenate as our aggregation method. It really won't make much difference to this data set. When we run this through, you should see the data back in its original form and structure, but now with fields 1, 2 and 3 containing the data elements without the quotes. A little more housekeeping. If we add a date time tool and convert the field labelled 3 into a new field called date_dt, we can select our pattern from the middle of the list here. So it's the one marked dd-mon-yy. If you run the workflow, we've now got a real Alteryx date field added to our results. Finally, drop a select tool into the workflow and we'll get the fields in the order that they're needed. Remove record ID, rename field 1 as text, rename field 2 as number, make it an int 16, and remove field 3 and make sure to keep the new date_dt field in that order. We can now add a union tool from the join palette and bring our two sets of records together. Now, if you like, add a reconcile tool and compare back to our target output. And when you've done that, you've completed the exercise. Great job. So stick around to answer the quiz in the next section, and I'll see you back for the wrap-up.